Unaware his wife just signed a $1 billion oil deal, he refused to pay hospital bills for her and their baby. What happened next will shock you. He didn't just abandon her once. He abandoned her twice, first in a hospital room, and later in a courtroom that would write the end of his life as he knew it. By the time the courtroom went silent, by the time the judge stripped Mark Carter of custody, approved financial penalties, and referred his behavior for criminal investigation, Mark still didn't fully grasp what he'd done. Because long before the court, long before the divorce papers, long before his public collapse, he made his cruelest decision while his wife was lying in a hospital bed. While Evelyn lay exhausted, stitched, and barely conscious after childbirth, while their newborn son cried under warm lights in the nursery, Mark stood at a window, glanced at an email from the hospital billing system, and told the administrator and social worker 2 words that would be documented, time-stamped, and played back in court. Then don't. Don't sign the authorization. Don't take responsibility. Don't pay. He refused to approve the bill. He refused to sign as guarantor. He refused to sign, even when told the baby might not be discharged without a clear way to pay. Hospital policy meant emergency care continued, of course. Doctors and nurses still did their jobs. But those 2 words triggered something else. Reports, notes, incident forms, and a quiet call to a hospital social worker who started a file with his name on it. What Mark didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that just hours earlier, the woman he dismissed as not working anymore had quietly signed a $1 billion offshore oil acquisition in her own name, protected by layers of corporate entities, lawyers, escrow, and confidentiality agreements. He thought she was dependent. He thought silence meant weakness. He thought cruelty would cost him nothing. While he joked with another woman in the hallway, while he snapped at Evelyn for embarrassing him, by reaching for her phone, his wife was learning something far more dangerous than anger. She was learning how exposed he really was. What followed wasn't screaming, wasn't chaos, wasn't a dramatic confrontation in the hospital. It was paperwork, audio recordings, hospital notes, time-stamped emails, court dates. And one by one, everything Mark believed made him powerful. His marriage, his image, his control collapsed in public. Because the woman he humiliated at her weakest moment didn't fight back the way he expected. She waited. She documented. She moved when the law, not emotion, was on her side. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just shock him, it erased him. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting her silence be mistaken for weakness again. When you subscribe, you stand with every woman who was underestimated, every child protected by courage, and every quiet mind that chose strategy over despair. Please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. The room was silent in a way that felt heavy, almost dangerous. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of power settling into place. Evelyn Carter, 32 years old and visibly pregnant, sat at the center of a long glass table inside a private conference room high above the city skyline. The walls were transparent, but the world outside felt distant, blurred, unimportant. Inside this room, only ink mattered, only timing, only truths that hadn't yet reached the headlines. In front of her lay a stack of documents thick enough to shift entire portfolios. At the top, Final Acquisition Agreement Offshore Energy Holdings. Valuation, $1 billion. Evelyn picked up the pen. Her hand did not tremble. Across from her sat Mr. Halvorsen, late 50s, silver-haired, chairman of one of the most influential oil consortiums in the industry. He had built empires, watched men crumble, and learned to recognize real authority even when it arrived in a plain blazer and low heels. To his left and right sat 2 senior board attorneys, sharp-eyed, disciplined, paid to spot trouble before it matured into disaster. Near the wall stood a corporate secretary, already preparing to notarize history. No one smiled. No champagne. No press. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transfer of leverage. Evelyn signed the final page. The pen lifted. Ink dried. $1 billion moved into a structure she controlled without applause. Her phone, screen down beside the folder, buzzed once. She briefly turned it over. A missed call from Mark, and a text. Doctor said you should be on the couch, not in a meeting. Are you still resting? The wallpaper behind the notification was an old photo, Mark's arm around her waist, both of them smiling in a cramped apartment years ago when promises still felt permanent. Back then, Mark was an ambitious 36-year-old with more ideas than money. He had always liked the word provider. He liked it even more once Evelyn started saying she was taking a step back from work and stopped putting her name on anything public. He never asked what she did with her days after that. He assumed. Mr. Halvorsen cleared his throat, his voice low but respectful. You understand, he said, that if your name were public on this, you'd make every finance headline in 48 hours. Evelyn closed the folder gently, as if sealing something alive inside it. Headlines make noise, she replied. I prefer structure. The chairman studied her for a long second. Men begged to be associated with a deal like this. She had insisted on anonymity, shell companies, escrow, NDAs. What no one in the room said aloud, but all of them understood, was that Evelyn Carter did not just negotiate deals. She designed systems. Years earlier, she'd been a junior analyst at a mid-sized energy firm, sitting quietly at the far end of tables like this one, often the youngest, usually the only woman, ignored until something went wrong. She watched senior executives reuse her projections without credit. She listened to her ideas, repeated louder by someone else. That's when she learned. Visibility wasn't the same as power. Power works best when nobody realizes where it's coming from. That lesson came from her father. He'd owned a modest but profitable energy logistics company, nothing flashy, but ruthlessly organized. Before he died, he left her more than shares. He left her a sentence she heard in her head every time she hesitated. If they don't know what you're worth, they can't take it from you. After his death, she quietly folded his company into larger structures, reinvested carefully, and never tied her net worth to her personal name. What she controlled sat in holding companies. What she just signed today sat in escrow, locked until regulatory filings cleared. She could not touch the money yet. She did not need to. Mr. Halvorsen slid a final sheet across the table. Our legal team files with regulators today. Until confirmation, confidentiality is absolute. Evelyn nodded. I understand. The secretary stepped forward to notarize. The attorneys stacked their copies. The meeting ended the way it began, without noise. Evelyn stood. As she did, a faint tightening rolled across her lower abdomen. Not sharp, just enough to make her press her palm briefly against the edge of the table. First baby? The secretary asked quietly, noticing the gesture. Evelyn gave a small smile. Yes. Keep your phone on, the woman said. Babies and deals like to compete for attention. Evelyn's phone buzzed again as if on cue. Another message from Mark. Call me when you wake up. I'm grabbing coffee before a meeting. He truly believed she was at home, resting. She had let him believe that for months. It made his ego calmer, his shoulders straighter. She had thought it cost her nothing. She slid the phone into her bag without replying. Not because she was hiding, but because somewhere beneath her ribs, a feeling stirred that timing was about to matter more than any explanation. She walked toward the elevator, heels clicking against polished stone. In the mirrored doors, her reflection appeared not as a wife, not as a supportive partner, but as a woman standing alone with quiet authority. Behind her, a billion-dollar contract lay sealed in a folder. Ahead of her, the first real contraction tightened around her middle. And somewhere across town, Mark Carter was already behaving like a man who assumed he still controlled everything, never realizing how expensive his ignorance was about to become. The pain hit harder this time. A sharp wave tore through Evelyn's body, stealing her breath and forcing her fingers to claw into the thin hospital sheets. She inhaled through clenched teeth, exhaled slowly, doing exactly what the midwife had told her hours earlier. This one's stronger, she whispered. It had been a long day. Morning, billion-dollar signatures. Afternoon, tightening cramps that refused to calm down. Evening, her obstetrician, unimpressed with her "I'm fine," ordering her straight to the hospital. Mark had driven, complaining about traffic the entire way. Now, in a bright labor and delivery room, Mark was pacing, not beside her bed, near the door. He was 36, fit, in an expensive shirt that still smelled faintly of cologne. His phone was pressed to his ear like it was the most important thing in the room. Yeah, I know, he muttered, turning slightly toward the window. I told you, Lena. I'll call you later. The name landed in the air like a dropped glass. Too casual, too familiar. Evelyn heard it. She didn't turn her head. She didn't ask, who's Lena? She focused on her breathing and stared at the ceiling, letting the contraction crest and fade. Mark lowered his voice. I'm at the hospital. No, not for me. The baby. Look, this isn't the time to talk numbers. A beat of silence while Lena answered. Mark's jaw tightened. I'll handle it, he snapped. Just don't do anything until we talk. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket, running a hand through his hair. His eyes flicked to Evelyn, then away, like looking too long might obligate him to something he wasn't ready to give. Another contraction rolled in. Evelyn closed her eyes. Memories surfaced like photographs. Mark in their first apartment, excited and terrified about a small startup loan, her quietly moving money from her own investments into his business account, telling him it was from a bonus. Him joking one night, half serious, I don't want my wife out earning me. I need to feel like the provider. She had smiled then, tracing circles on his wrist. Then I'll make sure you never feel small. Back then, it had sounded romantic. Later, it became a habit, turning down a visible promotion, downplaying what she actually understood about the industry, packaging every suggestion as a question so he wouldn't feel threatened. She thought she was protecting the marriage. In reality, she was building a cage for herself. A knock at the door pulled her back. A nurse in her 40s stepped in, badge reading Nurse Patel, expression warm but focused. She checked the monitor, adjusted an IV, and smiled briefly at Evelyn. You're progressing, she said. We'll likely admit you fully to labor and delivery now. She turned to Mark, professional tone clicking in. Sir, we'll need to confirm your insurance information and get your authorization for admission and postnatal care. We've sent an estimate to your phone and email. We can also discuss payment plans with our financial counselor if needed. Mark stiffened, the word payment snagging on nerves already frayed. Right now? He asked. Yes, Nurse Patel replied gently. We continue emergency care regardless, of course, but for the private room, extended stay, and newborn care after discharge, we need someone documented as financially responsible. Evelyn watched him from the corner of her eye. He pulled his phone out again, thumb tapping the screen a little too hard. A notification from the hospital billing portal glowed up at him. Projected charges, labor, delivery, postnatal care, newborn stay. The number made his mouth flatten. Another contraction caught Evelyn, longer and deeper. She exhaled slowly, letting the nurse coach her through it. Mark didn't move toward her. His eyes were glued to the estimate. The pause that followed wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Nurse Patel waited patiently, tablet in hand, used to awkward conversations about money, but rarely with someone dressed this well. Sir, she prompted, do you want us to pre-authorize now, or would you prefer to speak with our financial counselor first? Evelyn opened her eyes fully and looked at Mark. She didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't remind him that this was their child. She simply watched. Because after years of cushioning him from discomfort, for the first time, she wanted to see what he did when nobody rescued him. Mark glanced at the estimate again, then at the door, then at his phone like it might offer a way out. Lena's words from earlier replayed in his head. Don't let her trap you financially. He inhaled sharply, eyes flicking anywhere but his wife. Give me a minute, he said to the nurse. Nurse Patel nodded, professional and calm. Of course. I'll let the desk know you're reviewing the estimate. She left the room quietly. Evelyn's contraction ended. The monitor beeped in a steady rhythm. Mark slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked toward the hallway, shoulders tight. He told himself he was just getting air. He told himself he'd decide after one more call. Evelyn stared at the closed door. Whatever he chose next, she knew, would be more honest than any love speech he'd ever given her. The hallway hummed with quiet urgency, wheels rolling, doors opening and closing, low voices sliding under the fluorescent lights. Mark leaned against the wall beside a fire extinguisher, as far from the nurse's station as possible while still getting signal. His chest felt tight, not from worry for Evelyn, but from the hospital estimate still glowing in his memory. He pulled out his phone and called Lena back. She picked up on the second ring. Tell me you at least stepped outside, she said, voice smooth, the faint echo of a bar or office behind her. I'm in the hallway, Mark replied, lowering his voice automatically. They just sent me the numbers. He rattled off the figure. Lena whistled softly. That's not small. Yeah, no kidding, he snapped. My cash flow's already stretched. The investor backed out last week, remember? Payroll's due Monday. Lena knew all of this. She handled the marketing for his company, and somewhere along the line, started handling his ego too. She'd listened to every complaint about pressure, expectations, and how Evelyn had decided to stop working. A baby changes everything, Lena said, but her tone wasn't sentimental. Once that kid is here, you're locked into 18 years minimum. School, medical, extra everything. If you sign for everything now, you're telling everyone you'll carry the whole thing forever. She doesn't have income, Mark said, pacing slowly. She left the firm last year. Said she wanted to focus on family. She barely checks emails anymore. He conveniently forgot how many of those family decisions had been driven by his insecurities. Exactly, Lena replied. So why are you the only adult in the room expected to think long-term? He bristled. She's the one having the baby. And you're the one they're asking to sign your name to every bill on that ward, Lena countered. I'm not saying don't take care of your kid. I'm saying don't sign away leverage blindly. Make her show she can contribute. 2. Set conditions. Otherwise, you're nothing but a walking card machine. Mark stared through the narrow window at the lights of the parking lot below. She'll understand, he muttered. She always does. That's because you trained her to, Lena said softly. The words should have bothered him. Instead, they made him feel in control again. He pictured Evelyn at home like he'd always imagined her lately, reading baby blogs, watching daytime TV, between projects, waiting for him to make decisions. He had no picture in his head of her at a conference room table that morning, signing documents that would dwarf every number he'd ever seen. He didn't know that woman existed. Just, don't rush, Lena continued. Tell them you'll arrange something later. Make it clear you're not an open checkbook. If she needs something, she can figure it out too. Mark nodded, even though she couldn't see him. This isn't about you, he said, his conscience pricking just enough to protest. Lena laughed quietly. Of course it's about you. You're the one who has to live with whatever you sign. Call me when you're done playing hero. She hung up before he could answer. Mark stood there for a second, phone still against his ear, even though the line had gone dead. Then he opened the email from the hospital again. Estimated charges. Approve, decline, request counselor. His thumb hovered over approve. He imagined Lena's voice. Don't let her trap you financially. He imagined Evelyn's quiet compliance over the years. Had she ever told him no? Really no? For a brief moment, he pictured going back into the room, taking her hand, saying something like, we'll figure it out. Then he thought about payroll, rent for the office. The failed expansion he hadn't admitted was failing. He convinced himself this was about being responsible. He locked his phone, slipped it into his pocket, and pushed off the wall. As he walked back toward the room, he passed a sign pointing toward billing and patient financial services. He followed it. He had a decision to deliver. The baby cried before anyone spoke. It was a thin, uncertain sound, but it filled the room more completely than any argument could. Evelyn lay propped up in the hospital bed, arms shaky but steady as she held her son against her chest. Warmth, weight, and a smell she knew would be burned into her memory forever. Her hair clung damply to her forehead. Her body ached in deep, unfamiliar ways. But for one suspended moment, everything was just here, alive, enough. The door opened quietly. A woman stepped in, mid-40s, neat bun, badge reading billing administrator Miss Reynolds. Beside her walked another woman in a cardigan with a clipboard, badge reading hospital social worker Miss Diaz. Behind them was a younger nurse from the nursery, hands folded, eyes soft. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Miss Reynolds began. I'm sorry to disturb you. I'll keep this brief. Mark stood at the window, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the parking lot below, like there was something there more interesting than his son's tiny fingers curling and uncurling against Evelyn's gown. What's the problem? He asked without turning. Miss Reynolds cleared her throat. We've received your initial review of the estimate, Mr. Carter. Our records show you declined pre-authorization for postnatal and newborn care. Evelyn's head lifted slightly. Declined? She glanced at Mark. He finally turned, expression tight. I told them I wasn't signing anything until we discussed options. Miss Reynolds kept her tone neutral. To be clear, all emergency and medically necessary care continues regardless. Your son is receiving appropriate care. However, without a documented guarantor, we're required to place an administrative hold on discharge and involve our social work team. The nursery nurse stepped in gently. It just means he'll stay in the nursery until we're sure there's a safe discharge plan and someone legally responsible. It's policy when there's a refusal. The words landed heavier than their calm delivery. Evelyn adjusted her hold on the baby, instinctively drawing him closer. I don't understand. We're here. We're his parents. And we want that documented with a responsible party for the bill, Miss Reynolds said carefully. You have options: insurance, payment plans, financial assistance. But we do need someone to sign. She turned slightly toward Mark, tablet in hand. Mr. Carter, do you want to update your decision? Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. I already told the counselor, he said. We're not authorizing anything new right now. She, he jerked his chin toward Evelyn, has contacts, family, whatever. She can figure it out if she wants extra days in private rooms. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn felt something inside her go very, very still. She reached toward the bedside table for her phone with one hand, the baby cradled in the other. The movement was slow, painful. Mark's eyes snapped to the gesture. Don't, he snapped. Don't start calling your old colleagues or your dad's friends begging for loans. It's humiliating. Evelyn paused with the phone in her hand. Humiliating. She unlocked it anyway. Her banking app showed cold numbers, investment accounts, corporate entities, the escrow listing for the deal she'd signed that morning, funds visible but locked by legal agreements until filings cleared, untouchable for now. She had other liquid assets, but any sudden large transfer today would trigger questions from compliance teams she didn't want involved yet. The money wasn't the problem. The truth was, if she bailed Mark out silently again, the pattern would continue. He'd walk out believing there were no consequences to his choices. She closed the app, didn't show him, didn't explain. Mrs. Carter, Miss, Reynolds said gently, you're also allowed to sign as guarantor if you prefer, regardless of your employment status. Evelyn met her eyes. In a few days, I'll settle everything, she said evenly. Today, I just need to know my son is safe and cared for. He is, the nursery nurse assured her. We're not withholding care. This is about documentation. Mark scoffed. So what? You're holding the baby hostage over paperwork? Over legal responsibility? Miss, Reynolds corrected, still calm. Sir, we're asking again. Will you authorize payment as the primary guarantor? Mark's jaw tensed. He glanced at Evelyn, sweaty, exhausted, stitches pulling when she moved. In his mind, she was the one who had stepped back from the world. He was the one out there fighting. No, he said finally. Not right now. I said what I said. He looked directly at Miss Reynolds. Then don't, he added. Don't add anything else under my name until we've sorted things out. If there isn't a clear way to pay, he added with a shrug, then don't discharge him yet either. Keep him there until it's sorted. I'm not signing for any of this. Miss Reynolds' stylist paused for a fraction of a second. Then she tapped, documenting his refusal. Understood, she said quietly. I'm required to inform you that this conversation is being documented in your file. Social work and, if necessary, child welfare will be notified to assist with discharge planning. She turned to Evelyn, her professional mask softening. We'll take your son to the nursery for observation for now. Once the paperwork is settled, he can room in with you again. Evelyn nodded once. Her arms tightened unwillingly as the nurse stepped closer. I'll bring him back as soon as I can, the nurse whispered. Evelyn nodded again. She didn't trust her voice. The baby left her arms, and the absence was immediate warmth gone, weight gone, a hollow space where he'd been. Mark was already reaching for his phone, conversation over in his mind. Evelyn watched the door as it closed behind the nurse and her child. Her father's voice drifted back to her, calm and merciless. People tell you who they are when there's something real at stake. Believe them the first time. She laid the phone on her lap, screen up this time. She had every tool she needed. Dates, times, names, witnesses. And for the first time in 7 years, she had no desire to protect Mark from the consequences of his own decisions. He thought this was about money. He thought saying, then don't, ended the conversation. He didn't realize he'd just opened a case. The soft click of the door closing sounded louder than it should have. Night had slipped in almost without her noticing. The room was dim now, lit only by the glow of the monitor, tracking her vitals and the small lamp near the sink. The spot on her chest where Noah had slept still felt warm, ghost-heavy. Evelyn stared at the ceiling. She replayed the scene again, but slower this time. "Miss," Reynolds' steady voice. The nurse's apologetic eyes. Mark's shrug. "Then don't." The words no longer sounded like a momentary lapse. They sounded like a verdict. She turned her head toward the door. Through the small pane of glass, she could see a security officer posted at the end of the hall standard protocol whenever social work flagged a file for custody tension or financial dispute. He wasn't there for her. He was there because someone had documented that the baby's father had refused responsibility. Evelyn shifted carefully, biting back a wince as stitches pulled. She reached for her phone on the tray table and unlocked it. Instead of opening her banking app this time, she opened a contact she hadn't used since before she got married. Carter and Doyle Family Law. Saved under a boring label years ago when her father's estate went through probate. She'd kept the number updated out of habit. Not because she thought she'd ever need it like this. She pressed call. The line picked up after one ring. "Carter and Doyle." A calm voice answered. "This is Amanda Carter." "Hi, Amanda. It's Evelyn." Evelyn Carter, formerly Evelyn Rios, from the Rios Energy Estate. The tone on the other end sharpened instantly, shifting from polite to fully present. "Evelyn," Amanda said. "Are you all right?" Evelyn glanced at the empty bassinet. "I just had a baby," she said. "They've taken him to the nursery. My husband refused to sign authorization for the bills. The hospital has documented it and said social work may involve child services if it isn't resolved." Amanda was quiet for half a beat, not shocked, calculating. "Do you feel physically safe?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "But I don't feel protected. Not by him." "Understood," Amanda replied. "Listen carefully. Right now, do nothing confrontational. Cooperate with hospital staff. Let them document everything. I'll send you a secure link. Forward any emails you've received from the hospital and write down names and times while they're fresh." A notification appeared almost immediately. Evelyn opened the secure portal and started uploading screenshots. "The deal we talked about last year?" Evelyn added quietly. "The acquisition is done. The funds are in escrow. My corporate structure is clean and separate. That gives us options," Amanda said. "We'll keep your assets ring-fenced. For now, our priority is your son and your safety. Once you're discharged, we'll file for temporary measures, custody, financial protection, whatever we need." Evelyn swallowed, throat tight but voice steady. "There's something else." She turned her head slightly, angling the phone so she could see down the hallway. A few doors away, near the nurse's station, Mark stood in profile, laughing. Beside him, in fitted slacks and a blazer, was Lena. She held a takeaway coffee in one hand, her other hand briefly touching his arm as she smiled up at him. To anyone else, they looked like colleagues or friends. Evelyn knew better. "They're here together," she said quietly. He called her. "She brought him coffee while our baby is in the nursery, and social work is opening a file." Amanda didn't gasp. She didn't curse. She just absorbed. "Good," the lawyer said. "That means hospital staff have seen them together. Another pattern, another piece of context. What do I do?" Evelyn asked. "For tonight?" Amanda replied. "You rest. Answer questions honestly. Don't argue. Don't threaten divorce. Let him think you're too tired to react. I'll start paperwork first thing. We'll request hospital records, social work notes, the billing refusal, and any incident reports. When we move with everything." Evelyn nodded, even though Amanda couldn't see her. "And my son?" she whispered. "The hospital will not withhold medically necessary care," Amanda said firmly. "Their file on your husband will do more for you than any speech you could give him tonight. Tomorrow, once I've spoken to their legal department, you'll authorize whatever needs to be authorized yourself. You can afford it. And we will make sure the court sees that you could, even when he pretended you couldn't." Evelyn exhaled slowly, some of the tightness in her chest loosening not because things were okay, but because there was finally a path. "They think you're dependent," Amanda added. "For the moment, let them keep thinking that. I can do that," Evelyn said. "Good," Amanda replied. "Then sleep if you can. From this moment on, we document. You don't have to raise your voice. The paperwork will." They ended the call. Outside, Mark said something that made Lena laugh again. A nurse walked past them carrying a chart, glancing at them briefly, taking in more than she'd ever say aloud. Evelyn watched for another second. Then she turned her head away from the window, closed her eyes, and let the monitor's soft beeping lull her into something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't raw shock anymore either. The moment he refused to pay, he hadn't set a boundary. He'd handed her the clearest evidence she would ever get of who he really was when it cost him something. She didn't need a fight. She had witnesses. She had records. She had patience. Silence, she realized, was not surrender. It was strategy. And by the time Mark understood that, it would be far too late. The first document hit the table with a flat, decisive sound. Evelyn didn't flinch. It had been 5 days since she'd left the hospital with Noah, in a carrier in a thick envelope of discharge papers, and a copy of the hospital's incident summary she'd requested and signed for on the way out. Now she sat in a quiet conference room at Carter & Doyle, the same firm that had handled her father's estate. The city hummed somewhere beyond the tinted windows, but in here, everything was still. Across from her sat Amanda Carter, late 40s, sharp-eyed, composed. Beside Amanda sat a man in his early 50s. Reed, private investigator, former law enforcement. His clothes were simple. His presence wasn't. On the table lay a growing stack of papers and a black tablet. Amanda tapped the top page. Hospital Incident Report, she said, filed by Billing Administrator Reynolds, co-signed by Nurse Patel, and referenced in the social worker's internal note. We also requested their final billing ledger, Amanda went on. It shows the entire balance was paid in full from one of your holding companies 3 days after discharge. That matters. It proves your son was never actually left without care or payment, only that his father refused to be responsible. Evelyn leaned forward just enough to read the bolded line. Spouse refused to authorize payment. Direct quote. Then don't. Beneath it, date, time, staff present. Her fingers pressed lightly into the table edge. Reed slid another sheet toward her. This is the follow-up from the hospital social work department, he said. They documented that staff expressed concern about your emotional state and your husband's refusal. They flagged it as a risk factor for discharge planning. Amanda's expression stayed neutral. The key point, she added, is that this isn't your word against his. Multiple employees, in writing, all describing the same thing. Evelyn nodded once. Reed reached into his folder again. Next, he said. Server logs. He turned the tablet toward her. Your husband's email shows he opened the hospital estimate and the authorization portal before the refusal. Reed continued. They provided us the access log under your written authorization. They can't share his account content, but they can confirm the timestamps. On the screen. Time, 1743, estimate email opened. Time, 1745. Authorization portal open. Time, 1749. Authorization declined. Amanda leaned back slightly. So he wasn't confused? He reviewed and then refused. Evelyn's jaw flexed once. He had money, she said quietly. Not a lot, but enough for the initial bills. Reed nodded and slid a thin stack of bank statements forward. We pulled what we legally can at this stage, he said. His business account had enough to cover the hospital's initial requirements. It would have hurt him, but it wouldn't have destroyed him. Evelyn studied the highlighted lines, deposits, withdrawals, balances. So he chose not to use it, she said. Yes, Amanda replied, and that choice matters. Reed tapped another folder. We also have the audio from your husband's call with the hospital's financial counselor, Reed said, tapping the tablet. They record those calls for quality and compliance. With your authorization and our subpoena notice, they release the segment where he confirms he understands the options and still refuses. Now for Lena. Evelyn's eyes lifted. We forensically imaged the shared home computer you authorized us to access, Reed continued. Your husband's messages sync to a desktop app. He never turned off the backup. He spread out printed screenshots, clean, with timestamps. Lena, don't let her trap you financially. Mark, she doesn't even work anymore. Lena, make her show she can contribute. Don't sign everything. Evelyn let the words sit in front of her without reacting. Amanda read them, then exhaled slowly. This shows influence, she said. Not a defense, but context. He was warned about financial traps and chose to interpret his own wife and child as the trap. Reed placed another item on the table, a set of printed photos. Mark entering a hotel 2 nights after Noah's birth. Mark leaving 3 hours later. Lena beside him, her coat open, their body language too familiar to mistake. Taken after he left visiting hours early, Reed said. Timestamps line up with hospital sign-out logs. Evelyn swallowed once. It wasn't the affair that stung. She'd suspected something the first time she heard Lena's name in the delivery room. It was the timing, the sequence. Refuse to sign, leave, go to dinner with someone else. Amanda gathered papers into a neat stack. So, she said, we have written hospital documentation of his refusal, social work notes expressing concern, system logs showing he reviewed and declined, text messages showing premeditated reluctance to support you financially, images that demonstrate where his priorities went immediately afterward. Evelyn looked up. Is it enough? For what we're going to ask the court? Amanda replied. Yes, especially combined with your own financial position. She slid a different folder forward, one stamped with corporate logos and seals. This, Amanda said, is everything you sent from the acquisition this week. Escrow documents, board approvals, valuation summaries, your position as beneficial owner. I've already arranged for the more sensitive parts to be filed under seal. Reed glanced between them. He still doesn't know? He asked. No, Evelyn said. As far as he's concerned, I'm a stay-at-home wife who used to be good with numbers. Amanda's mouth tightened just enough to betray opinion. Good, she said. Let him keep believing that for now. We're going to file for divorce, temporary sole custody, and a restraining order on marital asset transfers. We'll argue that he's a financial risk and a neglectful caregiver. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the stack of evidence. What if he tries to apologize? She asked quietly. What if he suddenly offers to pay for everything and show up? Then, Amanda said, he's admitting he knew what mattered and simply chose not to act until there were consequences. Courts pay more attention to what people do when nobody's watching. Reed stood, collecting some of his notes. He's not going to stop, he said matter-of-factly. Guys like him rarely do. Once he feels cornered, he'll send texts, make calls, maybe even say things that help us. I'll keep monitoring what we can legally monitor. Amanda nodded. You don't confront him. You don't warn him. You don't threaten him with court. You respond through us only. That way, every desperate move he makes goes straight into the file. Evelyn sat back slowly. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel destroyed either. She felt aligned. As if the outside record finally matched the reality she'd been silently living. Amanda closed the main folder and placed it in front of her. When we move, the lawyer said, it will be public. There's no halfway version of this. You understand that, yes? Evelyn held her gaze. I understand. She rose, gathering the folder carefully. Her fingers brushed the hospital report one more time, the line, then don't, still visible through the translucent cover. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware. And somewhere across town, Mark Carter was still switching between texts and meetings. Walking through his days as if nothing had changed, not realizing that every step he took now was being measured against a record that no longer needed his permission to exist. The file was closed. The case, however, was just starting to unfold. 2 weeks later, laughter rose around Mark Carter, just as his world quietly shifted. He stood near the center of a polished event hall, drink in hand, retelling for the third time how he'd navigated a tough quarter and managed cash flow like a pro. The people around him, small investors, other founders, a few local executives nodded, half listening, more interested in being near confidence than verifying competence. Mark thrived in rooms like this. He did not see the woman in the dark blazer until she stopped directly in front of him. Mark Carter? She asked. Her voice was clear, professional, practiced. She carried a slim leather folder. Her expression was neutral, not hostile. Mark turned, still smiling. Yeah, that's me. He expected a business card, a compliment, a request to connect. Instead, she opened the folder. My name is Angela Perez, she said. I'm a process server. You are being served with a divorce petition and accompanying motions for temporary custody and financial orders. The words sliced through the noise. The closest circle fell silent first. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Someone's glass clinked softly against the table, suddenly too loud. Mark blinked once, then laughed, the sound sharp and off-key. This is someone's mixed something up, he said. You've got the wrong guy. Angela didn't argue. She held out the folder. You've been properly identified. Service is complete. His fingers closed around the documents automatically. Nearby, one of the event organizers signaled discreetly to venue security. Two guards shifted position, not closing in, just watching. Not for violence, for embarrassment. Mark's neck felt hot. What is this? He muttered, flipping through the first pages too fast to understand. Legal phrases flashed past his eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Motion for temporary sole, legal and physical custody. Request for temporary orders restraining dissipation of marital assets. And that phrase, based in part on documented medical abandonment and financial neglect. His chest tightened. Behind him, someone whispered, "Is that Evelyn?" Another voice. "Did he get served at an event?" Mark snapped the folder shut. Across the room, at the edge of the bar area, Lena stood frozen mid-sip. Her eyes met his for a split second wide, assessing, and then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped back. Distance. "Did you know about this?" he demanded, taking an involuntary step toward her. Lena's lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, her gaze flicked sideways, scanning who was watching, where the nearest exit was, which conversations had already changed tone. The process server glanced at her watch. "All future communication can go through your attorney," she said, tone still polite. Then she turned and left. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. A new email from his office bank, an automatic alert. Notice, legal documents received referencing account. He ignored it. He shoved his way to the edge of the group and out a side door onto a small balcony, air cooler but not calming. He opened the folder again, more carefully this time. Attached to the petition was a thick exhibit stack. On top, hospital incident report, Carter, Evelyn. Next, social work note, financial refusal. Then, screenshots he recognized with a jolt. His words to Lena about not wanting to be a wallet. Lena's messages about not letting Evelyn trap him financially. His mouth went dry. He fumbled for his phone and dialed Evelyn. The call rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Same result. A memory flickered. Evelyn in the hospital bed, her face pale, eyes steady, saying nothing while he argued with Miss Reynolds. He remembered feeling oddly triumphant when she didn't fight back. It hit differently now. Mark turned back toward the event hall, looking for Lena. Through the glass, he saw her already talking to someone else, her body angled away from him, not even glancing in his direction. The guards at the door looked politely bored and quietly alert. He checked the papers again, hunting for some line that would say this is reversible, this is a warning, not a reality. Instead, he found a bold sentence near the end. Hearing on temporary orders scheduled for date. Respondent is required to appear. Failure to do so may result in default. His heart pounded. He had come here to talk about timing and smart risks. Now, for the first time, he realized he had no idea how much time he had left before this folder turned into something he couldn't charm his way around. He stared at his reflection in the glass suit, perfect, drink still in his hand, smile gone. If this was just the petition, what else did she have that he hadn't seen yet? Several weeks after he was served, court is now in session. The bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom, followed by the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of people settling into place. Mark Carter sat at the respondent's table, suit pressed so sharply it looked like armor. The illusion broke at his hands. They were clasped too tightly on the table, knuckles white. His attorney, a man he'd hired in a rush after being served, whispered something in his ear that didn't seem to land. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat beside Amanda Carter. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry aside from her wedding ring still on. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. There were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind all new parents carried, but there was nothing broken in her face. At the back, a carrier rested beside a trusted family friend, rocking gently with the smallest of motions. Baby Noah slept, oblivious. On the bench sat Judge Holloway, early 60s, silver hair, eyes that had seen too many people treat court like theater. He scanned the case file in front of him, then looked up. Case number 3475, Carter versus Carter, he said. We're here today on petitioner's motions for temporary orders concerning custody, support, and financial restraints. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? Amanda rose. Yes, Your Honor. Mark's attorney stood as well. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Holloway nodded. Miss Carter, you may begin. Amanda walked to the center of the courtroom, a small remote in her hand. Behind her, a screen flickered to life. This case, she said, is not at its core about wealth. It is about responsibility under pressure. She clicked the remote. A hospital logo appeared, followed by a scanned page. Exhibit A, Amanda said. Hospital incident report dated the day of the child's birth. I direct the court's attention to the section highlighted in yellow. The text zoomed in. Spouse refused to authorize payment despite explanation of options. Verbatim, quote, documented by 2 staff. Then don't. Administrative hold initiated. Social work notified. A murmur rippled through the gallery seats. Amanda continued. Exhibit B, internal social work note. It notes concern that the father refused to sign as guarantor while the mother was recovering from childbirth and that he left the hospital shortly after without resolving the matter. Next slide. Authorized access log entries from the hospital billing portal. Timestamp showing viewing of estimate, then a declined authorization. Exhibit C, Amanda said. System log confirming the respondent opened and declined the financial authorization. She paused, letting the judge process the sequence. We also submit bank statements indicating that, at the time of refusal, the respondent had sufficient funds to secure initial payment, even if doing so would have been inconvenient. Mark's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about my client's obligations regarding inconvenient payments. Overruled, Judge Holloway said calmly. This is a temporary orders hearing, not a criminal trial. I'm assessing patterns and risks. Continue, Miss Carter. Amanda nodded, unbothered. Exhibit D, she said, clicking again. Screenshots appeared text exchanges between Mark and Lena. Names and phone numbers redacted for public display but present in the sealed file. Don't let her trap you financially. She doesn't even work anymore. Make her show she can contribute. Don't sign everything. These messages were retrieved from a device sync that both parties had access to, Amanda said. They show that the respondent's refusal to authorize care was not a momentary oversight. It reflects a pre-existing belief that supporting his wife and newborn child financially was a trap to avoid. Mark stared at the floor. And finally, Exhibit E. Another click. Photos appeared. Mark and Lena entering and leaving a hotel 2 nights after the birth. The timestamps matched against hospital records showing early sign-out from visiting hours. Not illegal, Amanda said, without judgment. But it is context. While the hospital was flagging his refusal in their system, and while social work was attempting to ensure safe discharge conditions for a newborn, the respondent's priority was elsewhere. The room was very still now. Judge Holloway's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Amanda set the remote down. There is one more piece of information relevant to these proceedings, she said. The respondent has claimed both in correspondence and through counsel that the petitioner is financially dependent on him. That is not accurate. She approached the bench with a sealed folder, handing it to the clerk, who passed it up. Under seal, Your Honor, Amanda said. Corporate documents, escrow statements, and valuation analyses. They relate to a recent acquisition completed by the petitioner in her professional capacity. Judge Holloway opened the folder, eyes moving quickly over the pages. Corporate seals, escrow confirmations, signatures. He looked up, eyebrows raised slightly. This indicates a transaction valued at approximately $1 billion. Yes, Your Honor, Amanda replied. The deal is currently under confidentiality restrictions with regulators, which is why we've requested sealed treatment. The key point for today is this. At the time of the birth, the petitioner's financial position was significantly stronger than the respondent believed. She had the means and structure to eventually resolve medical bills herself. She let that sink in. The problem, she continued, is not that they were poor. The problem is that, when faced with his wife in recovery and a newborn child, the respondent's first instinct was to protect his own sense of control, even if it meant leaving his child's discharge in limbo. She returned to her table and sat. Judge Holloway folded his hands, turning his attention to Evelyn. Mrs. Carter, he said, voice steady. Is it true that you are the beneficial owner of the entities described in these documents? Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn replied, standing. The funds are in escrow. I did not move them at the time because of regulatory rules and because I wanted accurate documentation of my husband's choices without my interference. Mark's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of this transaction. He believed his wife had no income. His decisions were based on incomplete information she chose not to share. Judge Holloway shifted his gaze to Mark. Mr. Carter, he said, did hospital staff explain that options existed: insurance, payment plans, financial assistance? Mark cleared his throat. They mentioned some things, yes. Did you understand that your refusal would delay discharge and trigger involvement from social services? I didn't think it would go that far, Mark said. Judge Holloway's expression didn't change. The law does not require your wife to disclose every asset she holds in order for you to act in good faith toward your own child, the judge said. You weren't asked to sign over your business. You were asked to accept financial responsibility as a parent. Silence. I will take a brief recess before issuing temporary orders, Judge Holloway said finally. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. The gavel fell. Conversations erupted in low whispers. The bailiff called for order, even as people leaned toward each other, already spreading the version of the story they would retell later. Mark turned in his seat toward Evelyn. Evelyn, please, he whispered harshly. We can talk. This is getting out of hand. She did not look at him. Amanda leaned in, murmured something to her client. Evelyn nodded once, eyes forward. Mark's attorney tugged his sleeve. We need to discuss damage control, he said under his breath. But Mark barely heard him over the roar of the only question he could form. If this was just the temporary hearing, what did the final version of his life look like from here? Mr. Carter, please stand. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence as Mark rose. His knees felt unsteady, not from the polished floor beneath him, but from the feeling that something much larger was about to shift. Judge Holloway's voice was calm, the calm of someone who had made his decision already. Having reviewed the exhibits, heard sworn testimony, and considered the arguments of counsel, the judge began. The court finds substantial evidence of the respondent's neglectful conduct at a critical moment in his child's life. Mark stared straight ahead, throat dry. The record shows, Judge Holloway continued, that Mr. Carter had the capacity to assist with hospital bills and discharge planning, but chose not to. It further shows that he viewed his wife's and child's needs through the lens of financial leverage rather than parental responsibility. He turned a page in his notes. Accordingly, as to temporary orders pending final dissolution, the court rules as follows. First, temporary sole legal and physical custody of the minor child is awarded to the petitioner, Evelyn Carter. The respondent shall have supervised visitation at a frequency to be scheduled through the court's Family Services Department once a formal parenting plan is established. Mark's hands tightened on the back of his chair. Second, the respondent is ordered to pay temporary child support and contribute to medical expenses in an amount calculated pursuant to the statutory guidelines. A specific figure will be entered into the written order. A rustle moved through the gallery. Third, the court grants the petitioner's request for a temporary restraining order, preventing both parties, especially the respondent, from transferring, hiding, or dissipating marital assets outside the ordinary course of living and business expenses. Any unusual transfers from this point forward must be reported to the court. Mark felt his stomach drop. Fourth, in light of the evidence presented regarding hospital incident reports and the respondent's documented refusal, this court is referring the record to the appropriate prosecutorial authorities for review of potential charges related to medical neglect and financial misconduct. The court does not determine criminal liability. It does, however, have an obligation to refer concerning conduct when it intersects with the welfare of a child. The words hung in the air like a weight. Mark's knees buckled slightly. He sat down heavily, the chair scraping across the floor. Beside him, his attorney muttered, "We'll appeal the scope of the custody order," but the words sounded thin, like promises made inside a burning house. Across the aisle, Evelyn quietly gathered her papers. Judge Holloway continued, voice steady. Finally, the parties' marriage is hereby dissolved on an interlocutory basis. Property division and permanent orders will be finalized in subsequent proceedings, but the marital status is terminated effective today. A clerk's pen scratched the official record. Mark looked over at Evelyn for the first time since the ruling began. She stood now, folder in hand, head slightly bowed as Amanda said something in a low tone. Her face wasn't triumphant, it wasn't vindictive. It was finished. Mrs. Carter, Judge Holloway added. The court notes your restraint in these proceedings and your preparedness despite difficult circumstances. The court also notes that you had the capacity to pay for your child's care and ultimately did so after discharge, but that you did not interfere with how the hospital documented the respondent's refusal. That decision provided clarity to this court. Evelyn nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Holloway looked between them one last time. This matter will return to my docket for final orders, he said. Until then, these temporary orders have the full force of law. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The bailiff called, "All rise," as the judge left the bench. People stood, then immediately began to turn, whisper, "Move." Mark didn't move. "Evelyn," he croaked suddenly, the word tearing its way out of his throat. "Please." She paused at the aisle, folder in one hand, her other resting lightly on the handle of Noah's carrier as their family friend prepared to stand. "We can fix this," Mark said, voice shaking. "I'll pay everything, the hospital, support, whatever you want. Just don't do this to me." Several people in the gallery shifted, eyes darting between them and the bailiff. Evelyn didn't answer. "You didn't tell me about the deal," he said, louder now, desperation bleeding through. "You never told me you had money like that. How was I supposed to know?" Amanda laid a hand gently on Evelyn's arm, a silent reminder that she didn't owe him anything. Not explanations, not comfort, not a performance. Evelyn turned just enough for Mark to see her profile. He waited for anger, an accusation, some explosive line he could argue against in his head later. Instead, she gave him nothing. No words, no reaction. She adjusted her grip on the carrier handle and walked toward the doors. "Miss Us, Carter, this way, please," a court officer said quietly, holding one door open for her and her small entourage. Mark lurched forward as if to follow, but a bailiff stepped slightly into his path. "Sir," the bailiff said, calm but firm, "you'll need to remain here until the hallway is clear." Mark stopped. He watched as the doors closed behind Evelyn, the small outline of Noah's carrier disappearing into the bright light of the corridor. The echo of the closing door was final in a way the gavel hadn't been. His attorney muttered something about filing motions, requesting modifications. Mark barely heard him. He had believed right up until this moment that there would be one last conversation that would undo everything. One apology, one dramatic plea, one chance. Instead, all he got was silence and the sight of her walking away without looking back. He finally understood. She hadn't come here to argue. She'd come to confirm, on paper, what had already happened the moment he said two words in a hospital room. The courthouse doors opened, not with a dramatic crash, just a firm, decisive push. Sunlight spilled across the stone steps outside as Evelyn stepped out, Noah's carrier handle wrapped firmly in her hand. The baby stirred once and then settled, the car seat canopy shading his face. A few reporters waited at the bottom of the steps, alerted by whispers about the billion-dollar wife and the hospital case. Their cameras weren't news truck large, but their eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Carter, was the ruling what you hoped for? Is it true you signed a billion-dollar deal? Do you think the system protected you today?" Evelyn didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. Her heels clicked in an even rhythm against the stone. "Miss..." Carter walked one step behind and to the side, a quiet buffer against the questions. "It's done," Amanda said softly when they reached the bottom. Evelyn looked down at Noah. His tiny chest rose and fell in the same steady rhythm the monitor had tracked days ago. Only now, there was no machine, no fluorescent light, no administrative hold. "Yes," she said, "it is." She didn't look back at the courthouse. Inside, in the cooled quiet of the now empty courtroom, Mark remained sitting for a long time, long after the clerk had gathered papers and the bailiff had relaxed at his post. The hum of the vents and the occasional creak of wood were the only sounds. His attorney eventually touched his arm. "We'll go over your options," the man said. "Appeals, modifications, compliance steps so the criminal referral doesn't become something worse." Mark barely nodded. He stared at the spot where Evelyn's chair had been, then at the door she'd walked through. The room felt larger now, but not in a good way. Like a theater after the lights came up and the audience had left. He had always thought power meant being the one everyone turned to, being the center of attention, being the provider. Now, with his name on a stack of court orders and referrals, with his access to his son reduced to supervised visits, And with the knowledge that his ex-wife had quietly built a financial life he couldn't touch, the word meant something else entirely. Power, he realized, was the ability to walk away and never need to come back to this room again. Outside, a breeze lifted a strand of hair near Evelyn's face. She tucked it back with one hand, the other still resting on the carrier handle. She paused by her car and opened the back door, clicking Noah's seat into its base with practiced care. He scrunched his face, then relaxed again as she adjusted his blanket. She leaned her forehead gently against the edge of the seat, her voice only a whisper. "I didn't destroy him," she said quietly, more to herself than to the baby. "I just stopped protecting him." She straightened, closed the door with a soft click, and walked around to the driver's side. Behind her, the courthouse loomed solid, unmovable, already receding into the background of her life. The real power, she knew now, wasn't in the building itself. It was in the record. The incident reports, the timestamps, the texts, the orders signed by a judge confirming what she'd lived through. It was in her choice to stop cushioning someone else's consequences. Inside, the last court employee turned off the overhead lights. The room dimmed. The polished wood gleamed dully, empty. Mark stood at the back now, near the doors, one hand resting against the frame. Beyond them lay a life with restrictions, supervision, and a reputation that would now always come with a silent asterisk. He thought of the hospital estimate he'd stared at, the moment he'd said, "Then don't." The feeling of control he'd had. For the first time, he understood the scale of that choice. He hadn't just refused to pay a hospital bill. He'd signaled who he really was when something real was on the line. And in doing so, he didn't just lose money. He lost access to a woman who had quietly become worth more than he'd ever imagined on paper and off. Outside, Evelyn started the engine. No music, no victory speech. Just the low hum of a car pulling away from a building she no longer needed. As she drove down the street, the courthouse shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced by open road and the small, steady sound of her son's breathing. He had refused to pay a hospital bill, and that decision cost him a marriage, a child, and a life measured in billions. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video. Husband and his entire family humiliate his wife at the Christmas party, unaware of who she really is, what she does next, ruins them. He thought the night ended when she walked out. He was wrong. At the Christmas party, surrounded by his family, their laughter, their raised glasses, Daniel watched it happen. He heard the jokes. He heard his mother mock her luck. He heard his sister laugh at her gift before opening it. And when someone reduced his wife to a placeholder, he stayed silent. That silence was his cruelty. He didn't stop them. He didn't defend her. He smiled, embarrassed but compliant, while his family turned her into entertainment. And when Emily calmly set her untouched glass down and said she needed to leave, Daniel believed he'd won. He believed she would cool off, forgive, return the way she always did. What he didn't know was that the moment she stepped into the cold night, he didn't just lose her. He handed her a reason. While he stayed behind pretending nothing mattered, she was opening a door he had never been allowed to see because he had never earned the right. A file he didn't know existed, a trust he never asked about, a structure with her name already written into it. Not long after, Daniel would walk into a courtroom, still believing he could explain it all away, still believing his voice carried weight, until he saw where she was seated, until he heard the evidence read aloud, until he realized the quiet wife they mocked had never been powerless, only patient. And when the consequences hit, they didn't hit one person, they hit the whole family. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like standing in that room, hearing the jokes land, watching her walk out, and still saying nothing. But when you click subscribe, you're choosing to be the voice she didn't get that night. You're standing with every woman who was underestimated, every quiet heart that survived in silence, and every person who finally chose themselves. Please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. The sound of the phone vibrating on the kitchen counter cut through the quiet like a warning. Emily Carter didn't pick it up. She stood still, hands resting on the edge of the counter, eyes fixed on the dark screen as it buzzed once, twice, then stopped. The caller ID was short, neutral, almost cold. Brooks' legal private client. Emily exhaled slowly, as if steadying herself against a memory she wasn't ready to open yet. Then she turned away, pretending the call had never happened. Emily Carter was 34. To anyone watching from the outside, she looked ordinary, soft-spoken, simply dressed, the kind of woman people underestimated without meaning to. She lived quietly. She worked modestly. She smiled politely. And she had learned, very early in life, how to make herself smaller on purpose. That had been a choice. Years ago, before her life narrowed into this quiet kitchen and this marriage, Emily had sat at polished tables with board binders stacked in front of her. She had listened to bankers and attorneys speak in careful language. She had signed documents that carried more weight than most people ever touched. Not because she chased power, but because it was handed to her the day her father died. He had been careful, precise. He taught her how ownership worked, how leverage hid in paperwork, how silence could be stronger than authority. When he passed unexpectedly, Emily inherited more than wealth. She inherited responsibility, influence, and a truth most people didn't learn until it was too late. That truth had come to her the night before the funeral, in a quiet office when her father's attorney opened a sealed letter and read his final instruction aloud. "If they know who you are," he told her gently, "they'll never show you who they are." That sentence followed her everywhere. It shaped her choices. It became the reason she stepped back from a world that never loved without calculation. So when Emily met Daniel Carter, she didn't tell him everything. Daniel was 36, ambitious, charming in a restless way. He talked about success as if it were something always one step ahead of him. He worried about money openly, almost defensively. He wanted more than he had, but not enough to question where it came from when relief arrived. Emily liked that he didn't ask too many questions. She dressed simply on their first dates, paid for small things quietly. When Daniel struggled, missed opportunities, financial stress, moments of frustration, Emily helped in ways that didn't bruise his pride. Not flashy, not obvious, just steady. She never reminded him, never counted favors, never corrected the assumptions he made about her background. She wanted him to choose her freely. When they married, she carried that choice into their life together. She believed love didn't need witnesses. That devotion didn't need applause. She believed the best relationships were built in private moments no one else ever saw. Daniel said he liked that about her. In the early years, he would squeeze her hand when things went wrong and say, "We'll figure it out." Emily always believed him. She always thought patience would be enough. Now, standing alone in the kitchen, she heard his footsteps behind her. Daniel leaned against the doorway, loosening his tie. He looked tired but excited. There was a restless energy in him that Emily had learned to recognize. "My family called," he said casually. Emily turned, offering him a soft smile. "Is everything okay?" Yeah, it's fine." He hesitated, then added, "They're hosting a big Christmas party this year. Really big. Everyone's coming." Something flickered in Emily's chest. Not fear, not excitement, just awareness. "That sounds nice," she said. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "It's kind of important to them. You know how they are." She nodded. She did know. He hesitated again, then laughed lightly, as if trying to soften what came next. "Just don't talk about money, okay? They're sensitive about that stuff." The words landed quietly, but they landed. Emily didn't argue. She didn't question him. She didn't remind him of anything she had done, or hidden, or sacrificed. She simply smiled again. "Of course," she said. Daniel relaxed instantly, as if a problem had been solved. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and walked away, already distracted by something on his phone. Emily stayed where she was. When the house fell quiet again, she crossed the room and opened a small safe hidden behind a cabinet panel Daniel had never noticed because he had never looked. Inside was a thin locked folder, unassuming, ordinary to anyone else. But Emily knew what it was. Personal trust summaries, marriage documents, a sealed envelope labeled, "If needed." She didn't open it. She closed the safe gently, as if the papers inside were sleeping. Emily returned to the counter, her eyes drifting back to the phone. The missed call from Brooks Legal still sat there, unanswered. She knew she couldn't keep pretending forever. She just didn't know yet that Christmas would decide everything. And somewhere beyond that invitation, something was already waiting to be exposed. The laugh came first, sharp, public, unnecessary. Emily felt it before she understood it, the sound cutting across the dinner table, followed by a pause that stretched just long enough for discomfort to settle. She lifted her eyes slowly, already knowing who it came from. Margaret Carter was smiling. Margaret was Daniel's mother. Early 60s. Perfect posture. Carefully styled hair that never moved out of place. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in her own home. Margaret liked control, and she liked reminding people who belonged where. Well, Margaret said lightly, waving a hand as if brushing away a trivial thought. Emily wouldn't understand these things anyway. The table chuckled politely. Emily sat still. This was how it usually started. The room was full that night, family, friends, longtime neighbors, people who had known Daniel since childhood. Plates clinked, glasses lifted, conversations overlapped. It looked warm, familiar, safe, but it never was. Emily had learned the pattern early. Margaret corrected the way she pronounced words, the way she held her fork, the way she described her work, always with a smile. Always disguised as concern, Lydia Carter, Daniel's younger sister, sat across from her, scrolling on her phone while half listening, late 20s. Loud where Margaret was subtle, she liked jokes that landed a little too hard. So what do you actually do again? Lydia asked suddenly, not looking up. It's kind of small, right? Emily opened her mouth to answer. But Robert Carter spoke first. Robert was Daniel's father, quiet, observant. He leaned back in his chair, fingers folded over his stomach, eyes fixed not on Emily, but on Daniel. So, Robert said, nodding toward his son. How's work going? Any promotions coming? Daniel straightened immediately. Yeah, actually, there might be something soon. Robert smiled, a small, satisfied smirk, as if the answer belonged to him. No one asked Emily anything else. She waited. She always waited, Daniel noticed. Emily knew he did. She saw the flicker of awareness cross his face each time a comment landed wrong. Each time his mother spoke over her. Each time Lydia laughed. But Daniel never stopped it. Instead, he shifted the conversation, asked about sports, complimented the food, changed the subject just enough for the moment to pass without confrontation. Emily told herself that was love, trying to keep peace. She told herself patience would teach them. Between bites of food, Margaret leaned closer to a family friend and said loudly, Daniel's always been the ambitious one. We're so proud of how far he's come. Emily smiled politely, her hands folded in her lap. She remembered quiet nights when Daniel came home defeated, worried about money, unsure of himself. She remembered covering small bills, encouraging him when he doubted his worth. None of that existed here. At this table, Daniel stood alone. Later, as dessert was served, Lydia leaned toward another guest and whispered just loudly enough, She's lucky Daniel married her. Emily heard it. She pretended not to. That was her mistake. Or at least, that's what she would later realize. When the evening ended, Emily helped clear plates without being asked. She thanked Margaret for dinner. She hugged people who barely noticed her presence. In the car ride home, Daniel talked about how exhausting his family could be. They mean well, he said. You know how they are. Emily nodded, staring out the window. She did know. Weeks passed, then months. The comments never stopped, they just shifted forms, a raised eyebrow, a half smile, a joke that landed a second too late to challenge. And then came the call she wasn't meant to hear. Margaret had dropped by unannounced like she always did, and taken over the living room as if it belonged to her. Margaret stood in the living room one afternoon with speakerphone on, her voice loud and animated because Margaret never spoke as if privacy mattered. We're hosting Christmas this year, she announced proudly. A real one. Everyone important will be there. Emily folded laundry down the hall, half hidden behind the doorway, listening without moving. Margaret continued, It's time we do something proper. You know, to remind people where we stand. Lydia laughed in the background. This Christmas is going to put her in her place. The words slipped out casually. Too casually. Emily's hands froze mid-fold. She didn't look up. She didn't react. She didn't let anyone see the moment land. But her fingers tightened around her wedding ring until it pressed painfully into her skin. She finished folding the shirt with careful precision. Because now, she understood something she had refused to see before. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was intention. And Christmas wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a stage. After that day, Daniel changed in smaller ways that were harder to name. Later nights, shorter answers, a phone that never faced up anymore. Emily didn't accuse. She just watched. And then, one night, the watching finally paid off. The phone lit up in the dark like a quiet accusation. Emily froze at the edge of the bed, breath caught halfway between inhale and exhale. The room was still, too still. The soft sound of water running from the bathroom told her Daniel was in the shower, close enough to hear, far enough not to see. The screen glowed once. Then again, Emily hadn't touched Daniel's phone. She didn't need to. A message preview was already reflected mirrored on the shared tablet on her nightstand, the one Daniel had connected months ago for convenience and then forgot existed. The preview flashed, clean and sharp against the black. I hate pretending I don't matter. No name, no photo, just the words. Emily stared at them longer than she should have. Her first instinct wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something colder. Awareness. The kind that settles slowly, like a weight shifting into place. She didn't open the message. She didn't tap the thread. She didn't scroll. Emily had learned long ago that rushed conclusions were often wrong. Patterns, however, never lied. Over the past few weeks, Daniel had been changing, but not in ways dramatic enough to accuse. He stayed late more often. He laughed at messages he didn't explain. His phone was always face down now, as if by habit. When Emily asked simple questions, his answers came sharper than before. Why are you checking on me? I told you I'd be late. Can we not do this tonight? The words themselves weren't proof, but the tone was new. She listened. She watched. Later that week, Daniel mentioned someone new at work. We've got a consultant helping on a few projects, he said casually while pouring a drink. Smart, efficient, kind of a lifesaver actually. Emily nodded. That's good. He smiled too quickly. Yeah. She said nothing more. A few nights later, while Daniel slept, Emily noticed something else. That same thread preview popping up late, too late for work, and always with the same emotional bite. Emily began to connect the quiet dots. She noticed how Daniel stepped into other rooms to answer calls, how he tilted the phone away from her without realizing he was doing it. Still, she said nothing. She waited. The night the message appeared again, everything slowed. Daniel was in the shower once more. Steam filled the bathroom. The mirror fogged over. Emily folded laundry at the foot of the bed, moving calmly, rhythmically. The shared tablet lit up. I hate pretending I don't matter. Same tone, same demand, different night. Emily lifted the tablet. Her hands were steady. She took a single screenshot, only the preview, only what appeared without opening anything. Then she locked the screen and placed it back exactly where it had been. She didn't save it in her camera roll. She forwarded it to her own secure folder, then deleted the forward from the tablet's visible history. By the time Daniel came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel and relaxed, everything looked exactly the same. You okay? He asked casually. Yes, Emily said, and meant it in a way he would never understand. That night, as Daniel slept beside her, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She didn't imagine screaming matches. She remembered her father's voice again, soft and steady. Watch first, understand second, act last. She didn't know who the woman was yet. She didn't know how long it had been going on. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone believed they mattered more than Emily did, and Daniel was letting them believe it. The next morning, Daniel grabbed his phone and rushed out the door. He kissed Emily's forehead distractedly and said, "Big day today." Emily watched him leave, her expression unreadable. She walked to the home safe and opened it just long enough to slide in a small note. One line, one date. Evidence doesn't rush, she thought. It waits. And as she closed the safe, her phone vibrated again, this time from a number she didn't recognize. Emily didn't answer, but she knew the next step was no longer about observation. It was about preparation. The phone rang sharply, slicing through the quiet of the living room. Emily flinched before she could stop herself. Daniel was in the next room, half focused on his laptop, but Emily already knew who it was. The ringing had a rhythm she recognized, impatient, demanding, confident it would be answered. She picked up on the third ring. Emily. Margaret's voice came through immediately, crisp and controlled. I'm calling to confirm Christmas. Margaret never wasted words, and she never asked questions she didn't already think she knew the answer to. Yes, Emily said calmly. What would you like to confirm? Margaret didn't pause. We're doing gifts this year, real gifts. Everyone is bringing something appropriate. There was movement on the other end, dishes clinking, voices in the background. Emily could hear Lydia laughing somewhere nearby. It's important, Margaret continued, lowering her voice just enough to sound serious. Everyone important will be there. Emily pictured it instantly. The room, the eyes, the measuring looks. She had survived it in smaller doses. This time, it would be larger. Public. That sounds lovely, Emily replied politely. Margaret made a small approving sound. Good. We want things done properly this year. And Emily, a slight pause, like a smile you couldn't see. Try to make an effort. Emily's voice didn't change. Of course. She thanked Margaret, wished her a good evening, and ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Daniel walked in almost immediately, as if he had been waiting. That was my mom, right? He asked. Yes, Emily said. He sighed, rubbing his face. She's been stressing about this party for weeks. Emily studied him quietly. His shoulders were tense, his eyes avoided hers. He hesitated, then smiled in a way meant to feel light. Just don't embarrass me, okay? The words hung in the air. Emily felt them land not sharply but deeply. She searched his face for a joke, a correction, any sign he would take it back. He didn't. I won't, she said gently. Daniel relaxed instantly, as if that single sentence had lifted something from him. He leaned forward and kissed her cheek. I know, you're great. He returned to his laptop, already moving on. Emily stayed where she was. In that moment, something shifted inside her, not anger, not sadness, understanding. He was more afraid of his family's judgment than of losing her respect. That realization hurt more than anything Margaret had ever said. Later that evening, Emily stood alone in a quiet store aisle, holding two gifts in her hands. One was expensive, elegant, impossible to ignore, the kind of gift that would change the temperature of a room. The other was simple, thoughtful, easy to dismiss. The kind of gift people mocked when they wanted permission to mock you. She stared at them for a long time. Then she chose the simple one. At home, she placed it carefully into a gift bag and set it by the door. In her bedroom, she opened her purse and touched the edge of a manila envelope tucked inside. Her fingers paused. For a moment, she considered taking it out. She didn't. She slid it deeper and zipped the bag closed. Not yet, she whispered to herself. That night, as Daniel slept, Emily sat at the edge of the bed, turning her wedding ring slowly around her finger. She thought about every dinner she had smiled through, every moment she had waited for anyone to speak up. Then her phone vibrated softly. She didn't ignore it. A voicemail, calm and professional. Mrs. Carter, this is Brooks Legal. We need to speak. Your father's trust requires the year-end authorization you postponed. The holding structure can't remain in limbo much longer. Emily closed her eyes. When the message ended, she sat very still. Then she spoke quietly, with certainty. After Christmas. She placed the phone down, turned off the light, and lay beside Daniel, her face unreadable in the dark. Outside, the calendar moved closer to December, and somewhere between gift bags and polite smiles, the line had been crossed. Christmas was no longer a date. It was a deadline. The front door opened, and the noise hit Emily all at once. Laughter, music, voices overlapping sharp and bright. The house was full, too full. Lights reflected off polished surfaces, glasses clinked, people hugged and talked loudly, as if being heard mattered more than being kind. Emily stepped inside and felt invisible immediately. Not because of what she wore. Her dress was simple, elegant, chosen carefully. She felt invisible because people looked past her through her like she was part of the background furniture. A wife-shaped space, nothing more. Daniel walked ahead of her, already smiling, already in his element. He shook hands, accepted compliments, laughed easily. Margaret and Robert stood near the center of the room, like hosts at a performance, smiling for guests, tracking status, collecting admiration. Margaret noticed Emily last. She smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Emily, she said, lightly touching her arm, you made it. As if there had been doubt. Robert nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned back to a man asking Daniel questions about work. As usual, Robert spoke to his son, not his daughter-in-law, about money, projects, and future plans. Emily stood beside Daniel, listening quietly. Margaret had insisted Daniel bring someone impressive from work, proof he was climbing, proof the family still mattered in the rooms that counted. Daniel had agreed too quickly, desperate for approval, and whoever the woman was, she had arrived with the confidence of someone who expected to be welcomed. And then Emily felt it before she fully saw it. The woman standing just a little too close. She laughed at Daniel's jokes before he finished them. She nodded as if she already knew the stories. She wore confidence, easily professional, polished, familiar in a way that didn't match co-worker. Daniel's hand lifted automatically, guiding the woman forward with practiced ease. "Oh," he said brightly, like this was normal. "You two haven't met. Emily, this is Claire Monroe. She's the consultant I told you about. Claire, this is my wife." There it was, the name, the role, the lie dressed as introduction. Emily's stomach tightened. Claire's eyes swept over Emily, calm and assessing. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, knowingly. "You must be so proud," Claire said softly, just loud enough for Emily to hear. Supporting him from the sidelines, the words were gentle. The meaning was not. In that moment, Emily understood something clearly for the first time. Claire knew exactly who Emily was supposed to be, or rather who Claire believed Emily was. Emily met her gaze without blinking. "I am," she said simply. Claire's smile widened, satisfied like a person who thought she'd already won. The evening moved on, but the tension stayed. When it was time for gifts, Lydia clapped her hands dramatically. "Let's do this part," she announced. "This should be fun." Emily handed over her gift bag quietly. Lydia lifted it, raised an eyebrow, and laughed before opening it. "Oh, this should be interesting." A few people chuckled. Lydia pulled out the gift, thoughtful, modest, carefully chosen. She turned it over, pretending to inspect it like a joke. "Well," she said loudly, "it's cute." The laughter was sharper this time. Margaret stepped in smoothly. "It's sweet of you, Emily. Some women are just better at fitting in." A guest laughed too loudly. Emily glanced at Daniel. He looked uncomfortable. But he didn't speak. Margaret continued, warming to the moment. "Of course, not everyone grows up with the same expectations. Some people marry into opportunities they never imagined." She smiled, lifting her glass. The room leaned in. Emily felt something settle inside her, heavy, cold, clear. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was permission. Daniel had given it to them every time he stayed quiet, every time he changed the subject, every time he chose peace over truth. Emily's fingers brushed her ring. She felt the edge press into her skin. She looked at Daniel again. He smiled at her then. A small, embarrassed smile, like he was asking her to endure a little longer. Margaret raised her glass higher. "Let's hear it for Emily," she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the music. "Proof that anyone can marry into this family." The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Emily stood very still. She looked at Daniel. He didn't stop it. He didn't correct it. He smiled. And in that smile, something inside Emily finally broke free. She felt calm, dangerously calm. As the laughter faded and the music resumed, Emily lowered her eyes, not in shame, but in decision. Because this was no longer a misunderstanding to survive. It was a moment to remember, and moments like this always come with consequences. The laughter didn't stop. It rolled on louder now, fueled by wine and confidence, like the room had decided Emily Carter was no longer a person, but a performance. Margaret kept her glass raised, enjoying the attention. Her voice grew warmer, looser, more careless with every word. "We're just so grateful," she said, smiling broadly, "that Daniel found someone who appreciates what she's been given. Not everyone gets lucky like that." A few guests nodded. Someone laughed. Emily stood near the edge of the room, posture straight, hands relaxed at her sides. She felt strangely distant, as if she were watching her own life happen from across the room. Margaret continued. "Some people spend their whole lives wanting more. Emily understands gratitude." Lydia leaned forward eagerly, feeding off the moment. "Honestly," she added with a laugh, "she should thank us for upgrading her life." This time, the laughter was sharper, louder. A man near the fireplace, someone important, judging by how people angled their bodies toward him, tilted his head and asked, almost casually, "So, Emily, what do you do for work?" For a fraction of a second, the room paused. Emily opened her mouth. Daniel spoke first. "She doesn't really have a career," he said quickly with an awkward laugh. "She does little things, helps out. Nothing major." The word little didn't need explaining. Emily felt it then, not pain, not shock, but separation. A clean, quiet break inside her chest. She looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet her eyes. And Claire, standing close enough to Daniel that her perfume sat in his space, stepped forward smoothly, sensing and opening the way predators sense weakness. She placed a light hand on Daniel's arm and turned to Emily with a soft, sympathetic smile. "Some women are just," Claire said gently, like she was offering kindness, "placeholders." The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. Then came nervous laughter, a cough, someone shifting uncomfortably, trying to pretend this wasn't cruel. Emily felt every eye turn toward her. She didn't move. She didn't blink. For the first time all night, she spoke. "Is that what I am?" she asked calmly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It cut through the noise cleanly. Daniel stared at the floor. Margaret frowned, annoyed by the interruption. Lydia rolled her eyes like Emily had committed the sin of making things uncomfortable. No one answered. Emily waited anyway. This was the exact second everything changed. Inside her mind, her father's voice returned steady, unshaken by time. "Never respond when they think you're powerless. Respond when they know." They thought she was powerless. Emily picked up her wine glass, feeling its cool weight in her hand. For a moment it looked like she might drink, like she might swallow it down like she always had. Instead, she set it down on the table, untouched. "I think I should leave," she said softly. "I have something to take care of." The room froze. Margaret blinked, surprised. "Oh well." Daniel looked up then, confused, like he'd forgotten Emily was capable of movement without permission. "Emily," he started. She didn't stop. No one followed her. No one apologized. No one called her back. They watched her go because they believed this was the end of it. Daniel stood frozen for a breath, eyes following her to the door. Then he forced a laugh too loud, too quick, and turned back to the room like a man trying to glue his pride together. "She's just overwhelmed," he said, smiling. And the room accepted the lie because it was convenient. Emily walked through the front door and into the night. The laughter behind her became muffled as the door closed. She stood still for a moment, breathing in cold air, grounding herself. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket, Brooke's legal private client. "This time," she answered. "Yes," she said quietly. A pause. "Mrs. Carter," the voice said, professional and calm. "Are you ready to authorize the filings we discussed?" Emily looked back at the house one last time, the lights, the music, the people who thought they had won. "Yes," she replied. She hung up, stepped into her car, and drove away. Behind her, the party continued. Ahead of her, something irreversible had already begun, and the next time they saw her, she would not be leaving quietly. Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't pull over. She drove. The road was dark and empty, nothing like the noise she'd left behind. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel. Her breathing stayed even. Anyone watching would have thought she was calm. She wasn't calm. She was finished. Emily turned into a private parking garage attached to a quiet office building Daniel had never visited because it wasn't hers in the way he understood. It belonged to a holding company her father had built long before Daniel existed in her life. The name on the building directory was forgettable on purpose, one of those bland corporate shells people walk past every day without thinking twice. The security gate recognized her plate and lifted. Upstairs, the elevator required a key card. Emily swiped once. The doors opened without sound. Her office lights came on automatically, clean, minimal, controlled. Emily crossed to a wall panel, opened it, and revealed a safe. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. She entered a code. The safe unlocked with a quiet click. Inside were the pieces of her life she'd kept separate by design. Trust summaries and separate property documentation. A signed prenuptial agreement Daniel had never read carefully enough to understand. A sealed contingency folder her father's attorneys had, prepared years ago, and a small external drive labeled in her father's handwriting, "If you need to protect yourself." Emily laid everything out on the desk, one piece at a time. Then came what she'd collected without drama. Screenshots of message previews, dates, times. And the part that made this bigger than heartbreak wasn't a guess, it was traceable. Maya had already been working quietly for weeks, activated the moment Emily forwarded that first screenshot, and Daniel had been careless in the way insecure men often are. Confirmations synced to shared devices, receipts sitting in email, reimbursements saved under file names that assumed no one would ever look, expense records, not assumptions, not rumors, numbers, hotel charges routed through business reimbursement, client dinners on nights Daniel claimed he was working late, a company card used in ways compliance teams were trained to notice because patterns always repeated. A knock came at the door. "Come in," Emily said. A man entered first. David Brooks. He was her attorney trust counsel first, litigation second, early 40s, calm, precise. The kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. Behind him came Maya Lewis, a private investigator with sharp eyes and no wasted movement. They sat without small talk. Emily slid the file across the desk. "This is everything," she said. David Brooks read quietly, page after page. No dramatic reactions, just tightening focus. Maya opened her own folder and added details with professional certainty. "He didn't just have an affair," Maya said. "He got sloppy. He used work cover stories, work money, work access. And Claire wasn't a stranger, she was brought into the same circles as your in-laws." Emily's jaw tightened once. David looked up. "Emily," he said carefully, "this isn't just divorce. This is exposure." Emily didn't flinch. "I know." David tapped the prenuptial agreement lightly. "Your separate assets are protected. Your father designed it that way. The marital assets are another process, but the evidence of financial misconduct gives us leverage," Maya added. "And the company can't ignore this. If Daniel used corporate funds improperly, it becomes a compliance issue. That forces action." Emily exhaled once. "Then we don't threaten," she said calmly. "We document." David nodded. He placed 2 sets of papers in front of her. A divorce petition and request for temporary orders. A formal complaint packet prepared for the company's compliance office and board counsel, fax only. Evidence attached. Emily picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. As she signed, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. David gathered the pages. "We file tonight. Service happens fast." Maya stood. "And I'll keep verifying. No gaps." Emily watched them move with practiced efficiency. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. And by the time Daniel realized what she had set in motion, it would already be too late. The courtroom doors opened, and Daniel Carter walked in like a man who thought he still had control. His suit was sharp, his posture confident. He nodded at familiar faces, family, friends, business contacts, people who believed this was a marriage issue that would settle privately like everything else. Margaret sat stiffly in the front row, lips pressed thin. Robert sat beside her, arms crossed. Lydia leaned back with forced boredom, scrolling like she couldn't be embarrassed. Daniel wasn't worried. Not yet. Then he saw Emily. She was already seated at the front, calm, composed, dressed simply. Beside her sat David Brooks, legal pad open, files organized, expression unreadable. Daniel's steps slowed. His confidence flickered. "Why is she sitting like that?" he thought. "Like she belongs here." The judge entered. Everyone stood. When the hearing began, Daniel still believed he could explain, still believed his voice carried weight. David Brooks stood first. "For context," he said evenly, "Mrs. Carter is the trustee and sole beneficiary of the holding structure established by her late father. Her separate estate is documented, protected, and fully traceable." He didn't insult Daniel. He didn't perform. He presented facts, screenshots and timelines establishing the affair, not emotional language documentation. Then financial records, expense reports, reimbursements that didn't match business activity, a paper trail that didn't care about charm. The courtroom murmured. Daniel's face tightened. The judge listened without expression, then turned to Daniel with a kind of calm that made panic worse. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, "temporary orders exist for a reason. They prevent people from hiding assets and escalating conflict. Based on what I'm seeing, I'm granting the requested temporary restrictions and ordering full financial disclosure." Daniel opened his mouth. Margaret shifted forward like she was about to speak. "Ma'am," the judge said without looking at her. "Do not interrupt." Margaret froze. David Brooks continued, voice even. "And for the court's awareness, Mr. Carter's employer has been notified of allegations involving misuse of corporate funds. We are not asking this court to decide employment outcomes. We are documenting relevant financial conduct." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" he said, too loud. Emily didn't react. Daniel's phone vibrated once, then again. He glanced down, then froze. Subject line: administrative leave effective immediately. His attorney looked at the screen, went pale in the quiet way professionals do, and slid a printed copy across the table without a word. Daniel stared at it like it was written in another language. Lydia stopped scrolling. Robert's mouth tightened. Margaret's face drained. Daniel's voice cracked for the first time. "This is insane." The judge's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Carter, control yourself." Daniel looked at Emily, then really looked. And in that second, the dinners replayed in his mind. The quiet support, the way money problems had softened without explanation, the way she never argued about how things got paid. Emily wasn't beside him. She had been holding him up. The judge spoke again, calm as a blade. "The court's orders are effective immediately. Violation of these temporary orders will have consequences." And then Daniel heard the sound that didn't belong in his fantasy of control. Footsteps. A uniformed deputy stepped closer, not to make a scene, but to make sure the court's space stayed controlled. And then a man in plain clothes appeared at the end of the aisle, quiet, professional, holding a packet like it weighed nothing, a process server. "Daniel Carter?" he asked. Daniel's throat went dry. "Yes?" "You've been served," the man said evenly, extending the documents. "This is the filed petition and temporary orders." The room shifted. Whispers started. Daniel looked around like someone waiting for the world to correct itself. It didn't. Security didn't move for Emily. They moved for him. And in that moment, Daniel understood something too late. This wasn't a fight he could talk his way out of. This was a life he had already lost. Daniel broke the moment the courtroom doors closed behind them. The sound echoed heavy wood shutting, and it was like something inside him collapsed with it. "Emily, wait!" His voice was too loud, too desperate. People in the hallway turned their heads, pretended not to stare, failed. Emily kept walking. Her heels moved steadily across the marble. Her back stayed straight. Her face stayed calm. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood quietly at the edge of a Christmas party weeks earlier. Daniel rushed forward and grabbed her arm. It happened fast. A deputy stepped between them immediately. Another caught Daniel's wrist and forced his hand away with practiced ease. "Sir," the deputy said firmly. "Step back." Daniel stumbled, barely steady. Margaret stood behind them, frozen. Her mouth opened like she wanted to command the hallway into obedience. No sound came. No one was listening to her. "Please," Daniel said, voice cracking. "Emily, please just listen to me." Emily stopped. The hallway went quiet. She turned slowly. This was the first time she really looked at him since the judge spoke. Daniel's suit was wrinkled now, his eyes wet, his confidence gone so completely it looked ridiculous that it had ever existed. "I was insecure," he said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "You know that. My family, they've always been like this. They pressured me. I just wanted to keep the peace." Emily didn't speak. "I never meant for it to go that far," Daniel rushed on. "I didn't think it would turn into this. I swear." Margaret found her voice, weak and thin. "Emily, families make mistakes. We can talk about this." Emily didn't look at her. She looked only at Daniel. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, quiet enough to be controlled, clear enough that everyone nearby heard. "You didn't humiliate me because you were weak," she said. "You humiliated me because you thought I was." Daniel's face collapsed. Emily reached into her bag and removed a single envelope. Not dramatic, not theatrical, official. She pressed it gently against his chest. "What's that?" he whispered. "Your copies," Emily said. "The petition, the temporary orders, the financial disclosures you're required to provide, and the notice from your employer." Daniel's hands shook as he opened it. He didn't need to read every line to understand what it meant. This wasn't a fight, it was a process, and it was already moving without him. "No," he whispered. "Emily, please." He sagged, knees weakening like his body couldn't hold the truth. The deputy's grip tightened. "Sir," the deputy said firmly, "step back. Now. You are not to touch her." Daniel looked at Emily one last time, begging. Broken, small, Emily didn't answer. She didn't comfort him. She didn't explain again. She didn't need to. She turned away and walked past him. She didn't slow down. She didn't look back. Behind her, Daniel was escorted down the hallway, his protests fading into the sterile quiet of a building built for consequences. Margaret stood in place, watching everything she thought she controlled collapse without a single person stepping in to save her. Emily pushed through the exit doors and stepped outside. The air felt different out there, lighter. Her phone buzzed once. A message from David Brooks. Filed. Served. Orders granted. We move next. Emily slipped the phone back into her bag and kept walking, steps unhurried, expression unreadable. This chapter was closed. But the consequences were still finishing their work. Months later, the pen met paper with a quiet, final scrape. Emily's signature dried beneath the last line, sealing decisions that couldn't be undone and no longer needed to be justified. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the building, steady, controlled, secure. Across the desk, folders were stacked neatly. Not chaos, not revenge. Just outcomes. Emily didn't rush. She read every page. She always did. This was her office, now fully hers, without apology. Bright lines, minimal design. No personal photos, no reminders of a life that had required her to shrink. David Brooks sat across from her, calm as ever. He slid the final document forward. "That's the last authorization," he said. "Corporate operations are stabilized. No loose ends." Emily nodded and signed. Maya Lewis stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Her work was done too. The investigation had closed quietly, but completely, no rumors left unverified, no evidence left unsecured. "They're still trying to reach you," Maya said. "The family. Not Daniel, the others." Emily didn't look up. "They won't." Maya nodded once, understanding. When they left, the door closed softly behind them. No echo, no drama. In the months since the courtroom, Daniel's family had fractured under the weight of truth they could no longer control. Margaret withdrew from public events she once hosted like a throne room. Robert stopped returning calls from the same people he used to impress. Lydia disappeared from the social spaces that once celebrated her voice. Claire Monroe vanished the moment consequences became real, because people like that were only brave when they thought the cost would land on someone else. And Daniel? His name didn't open doors anymore. It closed them. Emily stood alone in the center of the office, breathing in the quiet. She crossed the room and opened the wall panel where the safe was hidden. This time, there was no hesitation. The safe was empty. No secrets, no emergency folder, no silence waiting to be used. She closed it and turned the lock with a soft click. Emily rested her hand against the safe door for a moment. Memories flickering, family dinners she endured, words she swallowed, patience she mistook for love. She had once believed staying quiet would protect what mattered. She had been wrong. She walked to the window and looked out, not searching for anything, just seeing clearly. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, not harder, just whole. In her mind, her father's voice returned not as warning, but reassurance. "You don't owe anyone your silence," Emily smiled faintly. She turned off the lights, picked up her coat, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the evening was calm, ordinary, exactly how she liked it. As she stepped forward, she thought not with anger, not with regret, but with clarity. They thought humiliation would make me small, but all it did was remind me who I was before I chose silence. She kept walking, because the truth was simple. Never mistake kindness for permission. And somewhere behind her, a door closed quietly for good. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'll see you in my next video.